So for today's episode of Standoff, we have a matchup that sort of goes against the format of the series. We usually look at characters and stands with similar powers like Mista and Whole Horse, Okuyasu and Vanilla Ice, Koichi and Sandman, and so on. But today's episode between Alessi and Prosciutto is going to be a little bit different considering both of these characters' stands have complete opposite abilities, although they are based around the same theme of aging. So to jump right into it, for today's episode of Standoff, we have Alessi and his stand Sethan versus Prosciutto and his stand, the Grateful Dead. We'll start by analyzing both of the stands, Sethan and the Grateful Dead, and then we'll compare the two after that, and then come to a conclusion to decide which age-based stand is superior. To start off, we'll first be looking at one of the villains from Part 3 Stardust Crusaders, Alessi and his stand, Sethan. So yeah, Alessi's a pretty fucked up character and just in general an all-around asshole. He's a sadist who loves inflicting pain on people, but he chooses to only inflict pain on those who are smaller than him, like children, and this is reflected in his stand's ability. Alessi's also sort of known as the pedophile character, even though it's never exactly clearly stated that he is a pedophile. It's heavily implied. And he's also one of the ugliest characters in all of JoJo. I really don't get his hairstyle. It's not as bad as this, but it's bad. So yeah, I mean, clothing-wise, it's a pretty cool design. He's sort of wearing overalls and sort of a striped shirt, so he's not that bad of a looking character, but he's an asshole. And his habit of saying can get pretty annoying after 2 full episodes dedicated to his fight. Alright, so enough about the actual stand user, let's move on to the stand, which is much cooler than Alessi, Sethan. So to start off with Sethan, we're first going to look at this stand's appearance, and I mean, it's just Alessi's shadow, although it does not take the exact same shape as Alessi's body. It kind of has its own unique appearance. As we see, it is kind of like a round head with a point on top, and then once we see it turn its profile, and since we're still seeing it in 2D, we see its full appearance, which is based off the Egyptian god Set, which is sort of like a bird-like, and it's revealed that the point on top of its head is actually a beak, and it turns into the more Egyptian bird-like appearance. So before Sethan's true appearance is revealed, the reason why we see it as just a circular head with a point on top is because it's the bird-like climbing up walls and things like that, and it's sort of soaring upwards, so it would make sense for the beak to be pointing straight up. And I think that's really creative on Araki's part, considering how you can manipulate shadows and make things look like something else when they're not, just because it's a fully dark appearance and you don't see all the details, and it being 2D. So A+ to Araki with shadow stands. Now onto this stand's abilities, which is quite simply age reversal. Anyone who comes in contact with Sethan, which is essentially just standing in Alessi's shadow, will drastically begin to age backwards. And drastically is almost an understatement, because as we saw when Jotaro and Polnareff were both in Alessi's shadow, for just even a split second, they completely aged backwards to around the age of 7 or 8 years old. But the powers seem to be a bit inconsistent, because as we saw, a woman who was in her 20s stood in the shadow for around 10 seconds, and only aged backwards to a fetus. So when we look at when Polnareff, who was around 23 at the time of Stardust Crusaders, stood in Alessi's shadow for just a split second, aged all the way back to 7 or 9, the woman who stood in there for 10 seconds should be just completely dead. So the way it must work is that as you stand in the shadow longer, the aging process goes slower and slower. Or the younger age you become, it causes the process to go slower as well. Because as we saw when Polnareff was in his younger state at 7 or 8, he got caught in Alessi's shadow again, and it only aged him a little bit backwards to a point where he was still conscious, I would say roughly around like 3, 4, or 5 years old. So maybe it's possible that this stand actually doesn't have the power to kill people, and it just starts slowing you down slower and slower as you stand in the shadow longer. And maybe there's a point that you can reach, maybe to a sperm cell, where you can't age back any further. And as well as Sethan being able to age you back physically, it also ages you back mentally, and it causes you to lose the memories that you made when you were adult. And one of the biggest parts about age reversal is your stand. Your stand will become smaller as you, and it will become less mature. And as we saw, Polnareff still used Silver Chariot at a pretty young age, so he was still able to use it, but just a very weak version of it. Sethan's secondary ability is its shadow reflection. This allows Sethan to create any sort of weapon or item that Alessi has in his hand, and turning it into a physical item that also takes the form of a shadow, but it can actually interact with things. And also we've seen Sethan be able to take a 3-dimensional form at some points, and also use weapons like that and grab things in the 3D space. But yeah, Alessi usually carries around like this big axe, and he uses Sethan to mimic the axe and replicate it, so he's able to reach higher spaces and attack things in different places where Alessi personally wouldn't be able to attack, but his stand can reach because of its shadow ability. So after looking at the stand's abilities, I would give you guys recognize a highlight moment or greatest feats moment from the character. And I really don't have anything for Sethan and Alessi. I mean, really his greatest feat was just using his ability on Polnareff and Jotaro. I mean, he really didn't do much after that. My favorite moment from Alessi was seeing him get punched by a baby Jotaro, but that's just me personally, so I really don't have anything for this. He didn't do much. He just used his ability, and then kind of, it wasn't really a stand battle after he shrunk them. It was just kind of a mind game chasing down Polnareff, but I don't know. I don't like Alessi that much. I don't really have anything for him. And now lastly, for Sethan's stats, it has a D in destructive power, D in speed, E in range, C in durability, D in precision, and D in development potential. So as we can see here, not the best of stats, but that's kind of how it was in Stardust Crusaders. A lot of the villains had really shit stats, but then once we get into like part 5 and 6 and stuff, a lot of the villains had incredibly good stats. So I don't know, if maybe we saw Sethan in a later part, its stats probably would have been better. Stand stats make no sense. Let's just leave it at that. Oh, one quick thing about its range. So it says Sethan's range is an E, and that makes sense for it being his shadow, although we have seen it being able to extend and retract. But I'm not sure what the actual range is for the effect of it. As we saw, as soon as Alessi turned Polnareff into a child, he started running away from him, which someone with an E range wouldn't do that with their stand. They would not run away to use their ability. So it's obvious that once Sethan's ability is activated, it must be just infinite range. It just permanently turns you into a child. I mean, unless he dies or anything like that. But I don't know. It could just be a couple miles or something like that, or it could just be unlimited. So that's unclear of. But his range, just the shadow, is a E. Now, moving on to the next analysis, we have a fan favorite character from Part 5, Vento Arreo, Prosciutto, in his stand, The Grateful Dead. So amongst a lot of other characters in Part 5, Prosciutto is a gangster. He's ruthless and he's a badass. Really, the main reason why fans of Prosciutto, and myself included, like him so much is that he doesn't really fit the stereotypical role that he is. He's sort of the more attractive, more intelligent brother compared to his counterpart, Pesci, who is portrayed as a not so intelligent, sort of ugly character. But as we see, Prosciutto genuinely cares for Pesci and he really admires him as a person, and he's not just lying to get the affection so he can get his brother to do his biddings or anything like that. He's a genuinely good brother who enjoys Pesci and thinks he's an amazing person with an amazing stand. And it really shows that deep down, you know, Prosciutto has a golden heart and he's not just out there for himself like a lot of the other villains, and he really cares for his brother, which is awesome because they fight together and they use teamwork together, and it was nice to see that he was a genuine person, for the most part. So now moving on to Prosciutto's stand, The Grateful Dead, starting with appearance, and damn is this a cool looking stand. So the Grateful Dead is an interesting design. It has giant arms that sort of suspend itself because it has no legs, and it's pretty much just a torso with arms and a head that have sort of like these wires or tentacles hanging out below it, giving the appearance that sort of at one point it was a machine, but it's sort of broken and aged. And it also has eyeballs all over its body. So JoJo fun fact on why the bottom sort of looks incomplete and sort of just, you know, damaged is because Araki originally intended on drawing a bottom half for this stand, but ended up scrapping that idea. But yeah, this stand really gives like a menacing metal type appearance that really looks like it's sort of mechanical, but at the same time really organic. A+ Araki, great design. Now on to the Grateful Dead's abilities, and like I mentioned earlier in the video, it's the absolute opposite of Sethan's. Instead of aging backwards, it accelerates aging. But of course, it functions in its own unique way and is totally unlike Sethan in the way that it works. So the Grateful Dead cannot tell friend or foe and will affect anyone in the areas, but there are ways to prevent aging. So yeah, everyone around the Grateful Dead is affected by the aging effect except for the user Prosciutto. Although Prosciutto can choose whether or not to affect himself with his ability, this can be useful to hide and give the appearance that you're not the stand user and that you're also being affected by the unknown stand. That ability right there makes the Grateful Dead so much more deadly than it would be without. So a couple more effects of the Grateful Dead's aging process. It also ages your mind mentally, very similar to Sethan's, so you're going to be aging physically and mentally forward. And obviously, as you get older, you forget things and your mind becomes weaker. So when under the effect of the Grateful Dead's aging abilities, your skin will rapidly begin to shrivel up, your your bones will become weak, your hair will fall out, and you'll just become very old. And as we all know, with age, bodies become weaker and more fragile. Also, if Prosciutto and the Grateful Dead physically come in contact with someone and actually touch a person, they can drastically increase the aging rate and just immediately turn them into just a shriveled shell of what they once were, to the point where the person affected even will lose consciousness. So the actual technical way that this stand works is that it's all based around body heat. The warmer you are, the more stressed, the more intense, the more, you know, your adrenaline's pumping, the faster you'll age. But the more calm, the more cold your body temperature is, and just cold in general, that will cause you to age slower. That's why we saw in the Grateful Dead arc, ice was a major factor because you needed the ice to have it on your body to reduce the aging process. And if you got worked up and your adrenaline started pumping, that would increase the aging process, which is not good. So as you can see, this can be a main advantage to the two coming in, as Pesci knows that all he has to do is keep his body cool to avoid the effects of the Grateful Dead. And while everyone's panicking, aging at a rapid rate, you know, Pesci can take care of everyone, while really all Prosciutto has to do is play a game of hide and seek and just hide while his stand takes the effect. Or just like I mentioned, that he has the ability to use his stand on himself, so he can just, you know, pretend that he's being affected by the stand as well, which in some cases can be even better than hiding. So as you can see, the Grateful Dead is such a damn powerful ability, and it is best when you have a combination, when you're working together and you have someone that can take care of everyone and just finish the job really while you're aging people. So now for Prosciutto and the Grateful Dead's highlight moment, it had to have been when everyone thought Prosciutto was dead, but the aging effect was still happening, and everyone was so confused, and they look out and you see Prosciutto hanging onto his life inside the driving wheels and the rod connector of the train, just being completely destroyed as the train is still moving. But through his strong will, he managed to stay alive till the last second to keep his ability intact to help out his brother Pesci, and also to complete his mission. Respect to Prosciutto. That was a badass feat. He's a great character, and I thought that was just incredible how, you know, most characters, I don't think Araki would have wrote them to be able to withstand that much, you know, damage to them without dying. But as it stated, and, you know, as we see, he has such a strong will. Incredible character. Love Prosciutto. And finally, we have the Grateful Dead's stand stats. A B in destructive power, E in speed, B in range, which is specified to be a whole train. So I'm sure anything equivalent to the length or the size of that train, the Grateful Dead would be able to affect. It has a in durability, E in precision, and C in development potential. Alright, so now that we've analyzed both Sethan and the Grateful Dead, let's compare the two and come to a conclusion to decide which age-based stand is superior. Usually for standoff, when we do the comparison, we really only focus on the stand and their abilities and not so much the stand user, because in most cases, the stand users use their stand to their fullest potential. But for today's episode, we're going to be taking into consideration the way that Alessi and the way that Prosciutto use their stands in deciding which stand is superior. So a lot of the stand users in Part 5 are just downright ruthless, and they're experienced killers, like Prosciutto and like almost all of the other villains in Part 5. And when we compare that to the style that the villains are in Part 3, they all really have their own unique niche that they use their stand, and they sort of relate it to their personality in a way, unlike Part 5. So Alessi is nothing like Prosciutto. He's not a ruthless killer, and he's really only doing this because of Dio. So Alessi's just really a bully who likes picking on kids, and then when someone his own size tries to fight him, he turns into a giant bitch. I mean, even when a little Jotaro, who was only about 8 years old, had the balls to stand up to him, he just, you know, started cowering in fear. And that is something that Prosciutto would never do. Alright, I know I'm talking about the stand users right now, but I'm gonna get onto the stands right now. So the way Alessi uses his stand is so different in the way that Prosciutto does. So Alessi kind of uses his stand to fulfill his personal wants and desires of wanting to be able to bully children. So if he has an enemy, he'll turn them into a child, not even so much to the point where they're unable to fight. I feel like he almost wants them to become like a sort of like 5-7-year-old child so he can enjoy his killings. Like he seems so happy when he was chasing down Polnareff and trying to kill him. So when we compare that to Prosciutto and the way that he uses his stand, he uses it very methodically, and he knows that his stand would be much better if it was paired with a stand that's more focused on combat, sort of in the way that Beach Boy is, even though there could be a better stand than Beach Boy to be paired with an amazing stand like the Grateful Dead. But it's whatever. So Prosciutto is a no-nonsense, like straight to the point. He's there to do his mission, and he's not going to go through any bullshit like Alessi would, who could use his stand to kill someone like Polnareff very easily if he didn't, you know, draw out the process of it and enjoy it and scare him. and just do all the things that Alessi that makes him so fucked up. But I mean, if Alessi was a no-nonsense person and just didn't have these personal desires, I'm sure he could use his stand much more effectively. So now, just looking at the stands and their abilities, which one is deadlier? I'm gonna have to say the Grateful Dead. When the Grateful Dead was in range and came in contact with Mista, he almost immediately, I'd assume it's in seconds, we don't know the exact length because it's still, you know, manga goes by panels, but I'd assume it was like seconds, it was just a few panels, and Mista just had all the life drained out of him and immediately went unconscious. When we compare that to Alessi, the aging process, although he doesn't have to come into immediate contact with them, he still has to be fairly close because his shadow has to come in contact with them. It's a bit slower, as we saw Polnareff was able to run all throughout the alleyways before he eventually, you know, settled on the age that the stand set him at, based on the period of time that he was inside the shadow. And even then, although he was younger, he still had his memories for, you know, a short amount of time, and he was still able to use his stand. When the Grateful Dead, on the other hand, is just sucking the life out of you almost instantly. And although Mista did come in direct contact with Prosciutto and the Grateful Dead, his stand was actually still conscious, but that's a unique case because that's just the way Sex Pistols are, and they will still protect the user even, you know, up until the user's dead while they're still unconscious. So Prosciutto and the Grateful Dead are an extremely deadly combo, and even another reason why they're more deadly than Sethan is because he's just able to affect more people with ease. I mean, he doesn't have to go up to them and touch him with anything. As long as he just exists in the space, about the amount of range as an entire train, he can affect all of those people. I mean, if he's in a city or a very, you know, a compact area, that could be extremely deadly. And also the fact that all he has to do is just hide or not hide and just make himself look like he's one of the victims as well is just incredibly overpowered. When Sethan is a stand that's really more focused on one target at a time, and also has the ability to transfer items from the user to the stand, which effectively all that really does is extend Alessi's physical range a little bit. So although right now the Grateful Dead is probably sounding so much better than Sethan, but the Grateful Dead, although it is incredibly overpowered at times depending on the situation, it's very situational. So the reason why the Grateful Dead arc took place on a train is because it would have been very quick if it didn't. All the people would have had to do is just walk away from the area. All the people that were stand users and realized, oh, this must be an enemy stand, something must be happening, we can't find the stand user, let's just get out of here. That would have worked. It's all they had to do. The fact that they were stuck on a high-speed moving train is the reason why they really weren't able to escape that stand. So in an open space in public where people are moving, I really don't think the Grateful Dead would be that useful. Maybe if the aging process kind of locked them in that area where they were so aged, they weren't really able to move at all. But as soon as, you know, at least as soon as a stand user realized they were aging, they would realize what's happening, and they would either look for the user, and they would come to the realization that they can't find him or something like that, and they would try to leave the area. But I guess that's what Beach Boy's for, to kind of keep people in the area. So, but the Grateful Dead by himself in an area that's not enclosed, not very useful. Unless you are coming in direct contact with people, but then that just puts you on scale with Sethan, and just kind of limits the Grateful Dead in its wide range. But we can't ignore how powerful the Grateful Dead would be in the certain situations, like, for example, an airplane. Say Prosciutto and his stand, just his stand, not even anyone else. He's just going solo this time. And there's an airplane that he's on full of like 200 people. All he has to do, turn the AC up in the pilot's room, the cockpit, get them nice and chilly, and just activate his stand with absolute ease. Even if there's other stand users on board, really no problem. All he has to do is play victim, and, you know, he can take out that entire airplane just by himself. So, to conclude, when it comes to which age-based stand is superior, it has to be Prosciutto's The Grateful Dead. And that's not to say that Sethan is a bad stand at all. It's amazing, especially on one-on-one encounters, how you can actually just really turn your enemy if you get them in your shadow just for, you know, say like 5-10 seconds. You won. That's all you have to do. But just because The Grateful Dead has, you know, sort of the overpowered fashion to it of the stand user being able to hide, and as well as being able to affect an insane amount of people, I think that's what puts it over the edge of being a much deadlier and much superior stand. There will be a card in the top right where you guys can vote on which stand you think is superior. And also be sure to leave your comments for future episodes of Standoff in the comment section below. Just be sure to check the playlist in the description below so you don't request a matchup that I've already made. So that was today's episode of Standoff. Two stands that are all about aging you forward and aging you backwards. Alessi, Sethan, and Prosciutto's The Grateful Dead. Thank you guys for checking out this episode, and be sure to like the video if I fought your boredom, and subscribe for more JoJo's Bizarre Bizarre Adventure videos, and also more episodes of Standoff just like this. Again, thank you guys for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed.